we go. Okie dokie. I'll push that out of the way. For those of you that have been attending for a while, you know that these webinars, today's theme is cross-cutting, theme of technology. What is it? Where do I address it? How do I address it? These webinars are designed for people who have their visits beginning in fall 2016 and beyond. For those of you that were legacy visits and addressing NCAPE standards or TEAC principles, of course, some of this information will not apply to you. And for those of you that have already submitted your self-studies because you're early adopters, and that is doing your CAPE, addressing the CAPE standards before they're required in fall of 2016, probably a lot of what I'm going to tell you is too late because your self-studies are already in, but perhaps you can glean some information for addendum or for your site visit, which should be coming up in the spring of 2016. So here we go. For those of you that have attended these webinars before, you know the drill. Mute your phones, and remember to unmute if you want to talk. We did have an issue with that last time. One of the attendees wanted to unmute and couldn't, and I couldn't unmute her either. So we had to address our questions through these other avenues, which is to use the question and answer, the Q&A box or the chat feature. Raising your hand, I will call on you, but of course if we can't get you unmuted, that's not going to do us much good. This webinar will be posted on the CAPE website by December 15th. And if you'd like a copy of the PowerPoint, you can email me. You'll see a new email address here, lcvinc1@gmail.com. Someone just asked if I sent the PowerPoint out in advance. I did not. I had sent out the PowerPoints as soon as someone requested that while I was addressing the standards, and did not send this PowerPoint out in advance. I apologize for that. It seems that if I sent the PowerPoint in advance, that many people snagged the PowerPoint and didn't attend the webinar, and I think attending the webinars are important, so I'm kind of in a dilemma about what to do about that, and with this week's survey, I will include a question about that. Perhaps you can give me some feedback for the future. So, moving right along. Today we're going to look at that technology cross-cutting theme. Our last webinar was on the diversity cross-cutting theme. Today we're going to start out by talking a little bit about why this appears in the CAPE standards from the Commission report and define both technology and e-learning, because e-learning and digital learning, some of that language did appear in the Commission report, and there have been some questions about that, so we'll define both of those for you. Then we're going to talk about where those CAPE standards highlight technology, so you'll be addressing the cross-cutting theme embedded in the standards, and then again as the cross-cutting theme. So first we'll talk about where those standards call for technology to be addressed. We're going to list if there are kinds of evidence available, okay, we're going to list some of those. Many of the times when I've taken what are the kinds of evidence that we're looking for here, I've taken that from some of the CAPE training materials and other information. And I think we're going to have to be a little more vague when it comes to this technology piece, except for when we talk about standard 1.5. And then, last of all, we'll talk about how to respond to the holistic question about technology. And I know many of you are asking for more and more examples. I'm going to give you a website at the end of someplace you can look to see how these the cross-cutting theme was addressed by an institution that has it on their website. So, first let's talk about the Commission report. There were two cross-cutting themes as well, you know, one diversity, one technology. Today we're focusing on technology, but both of these were defined by the Commission as critical areas that require new learning and substantial innovation. So the Commission found that these two themes were both challenges and essential to be embedded into every aspect of educator preparation. Neither one appear as separate standards, and so this was a bit of a difference from certainly the NCAPE standards, which had a standard 4 on diversity. The Commission wanted to say that although there is not a standalone standard for diversity, there is the understanding by the Commissioners that aspects of diversity, including technology, are essential to educator preparation programs today, and so that those were to be cross-cutting themes that needed to be addressed holistically across all programs. So, as you can see, these critical understandings are that the integration of diversity and technology is not taken for granted by CAPE, that they do expect that people are going to have some innovations to be brought to the fore when it comes to integrating technology, that there are going to be challenges to this, and CAPE is ready to, I think, accept whatever challenges people put forth in their studies. And last of all, however, that every single aspect of educator preparation should address these two themes. And so in a minute, we'll get into the standards and where these themes appear. But first, let's talk about what is CAPE defining technology as. And it's saying that their technology is those tools and techniques, okay, that are available through computers, internet, text communications, multimedia. You can see this. But there's two important distinctions that they make in their definition. One is that technology are tools and techniques for storing, processing, analyzing data in quality assurance systems, and the other is so that candidates demonstrate that they can use technology effectively. So in CAPE's definition of technology, they're looking for both the integration of technology as a way to hold and understand and analyze data, and to be preparing our candidates to use technology effectively in regards to student learning. So you'll expect to see that the tools and techniques for teaching will be embedded in Standard 1, and that there will be some aspect of technology addressed, although it is not in the standard. You should consider addressing it when you write holistically about the cross-cutting theme in relation to Standard 5. So let's move forward here on digital learning. You'll see a bunch of underlines and things here about digital learning or e-learning. And this is really talking, and I think one of the most important parts of this entire slide are the final sentences, that these alternative names really emphasize a particular aspect, component, or delivery model method. Okay, so whether we're talking about information technologies, educational technology, technology-enhanced learning, computer-based training, all of these things that relate to communication and information, electronics, electronic media. This is what CAPE is meaning when they talk about digital learning. So where are digital learning and technology in the CAPE standards? And we find them most importantly in component 1.5. This is the component that states that providers ensure that completers model and apply technology standards when they're designing, implementing, and assessing learning experiences, and that they're using technology to improve learning as well as to enrich their own professional practice. So this is one of the components of Standard 1.1 that you'll very explicitly address in terms of providing evidence of technology. In Standard 2, on clinical experiences and clinical practice, partnerships and practice, technology-enhanced learning opportunities are a part of that, and we'll be delving into each one of these standards in how technology appears in the wording of the components in just a minute. But you'll see for Standard 2 that some kind of technology wording appears in each one of the components in Standard 2, whether it's related to partners, clinical educators, or clinical practice itself. And then lastly, Standard 3, when it talks about selection of candidates upon completion, they're expecting that candidates are developing knowledge and skills during preparation, including the integration of technology in all domains. And what CAPE means by all domains, I'll explain when we get into the Standard 3 wording exactly. Any questions or comments at this point? I did have a question about whether I had provided the PowerPoint in advance, and I've already noted that I have not done that this week. And my apologies for falling back on a promise. And I don't see any other questions at this point, and no hands up, and no chats. So we're going to move forward. Component 1.5 first. Okay, key language. Providers need to ensure that candidates can model and apply technology standards. And you can see that they're looking for, throughout their planning, their design, their implementation, and their assessment of learning experiences. They're looking for folks to be able to engage their students, improve their student learning, and enrich their own candidates' own professional practice. So that accessing and using the internet and the tools that technology provides us in multiple ways, whether that's iPads or the internet or the social networks, social media networks, etc. So what you should think about when you're looking at component 1.5, and this is identical to the information that I shared when I spoke on Standard 1, is what evidence do you have that would demonstrate your candidates can model and apply technology in ways that enhance their learning of their students and that can enhance their learning themselves. So I tried to simplify that, I guess, the wording of the component. So one of the things that I wanted to put in here is straight out of the commission report. I say technology proficiencies, and I show you page 30. Now this is page 30 of the commission report, not page 30 of the evidence guide or page 30 of the accreditation manual. On the CAPE website is the original commission report if you want to see where I've gotten these things from. But this is where some possible technology proficiencies were extracted from what the commissioners felt were important. So you've got developing the skills and dispositions for accessing online, all kinds of stuff online, whether those are research databases or digital media or tools, and that they can identify research-based practices that will improve their students' learning by using technology and the internet. Knowing how and why to help their students to access and assess the quality and relevance of digital academic content. Now, of course, this will be more relevant for candidates who are teaching in higher grades, perhaps not so much early childhood area here. I had a conversation with a group about this recently. But certainly for the middle grades and high school grades and even the later elementary grades, start talking to so that the candidates have an understanding of how to speak to their own students and teach their students about how to access information from the internet is something their students already do, but I think this assessment of the quality and the relevance, of digital content is really important to start teaching our students and have our candidates be familiar with that so that they can demonstrate that. Another proficiency to demonstrate their ability to design and facilitate learning, as well as collaboration, to encourage the use of social networks as resources, to help identify digital content, and to help their students gain access to what technology has to offer. So often we've had the conversation in teacher education that the students, many of them are ahead of the teachers in this regard, and I think that's probably why I came down so heavily on knowing how and when to help their students assess the quality of what they're accessing. Because they can get into just about anything, but we need to help them to understand what's a good resource for them and what is maybe not such a good resource for them. So there we go. Some of the evidence that was suggested by CAPE in their reviewer training was very specific to technology related to component 1.5. So that what they're looking for is any evidence that is showing how candidates are accessing databases, digital media, and tools to improve learning. Again, how they know why and how to aid student access and evaluation of digital content. You can see the way that these suggested evidence links back to that commission report, okay, on page 30. Can they design and facilitate digital learning? Can they use social networks as a resource? can they use digital networks to report and track student learning? So these are pieces of evidence that you would want to submit. Now, I've also pointed out on one of my first slides that the important distinction here was candidate use as well as EPP use of technology to collect and analyze data. So don't forget that part either. So in terms of the reviewers, they're looking for at least 3 of the 4 categories below, and these are categories we've spoken about that appeared in the commission report that I just shared with you as pieces of evidence, and now you're seeing that reviewers are expected to find at least 3 of these 4 areas. This accessing of databases, this knowing how and why to help K-12 students access and assess digital quality, ability to design and facilitate digital learning, and candidates' use of technology to track, share, and evaluate student learning. So all of these 4 categories seem to be expectations of CAPE that you're going to have at least 3 of these to meet minimum criteria in this particular component. This can also, since we're talking about the cross-cutting theme, you're going to cross-tag if you're using evidence, no matter whether you're the selected improvement pathway or the inquiry brief pathway, if you've identified technology for the inquiry brief folks as one of your claims and your candidate's technology use, you're going to provide evidence for that under Standard 1. And all of the SI and TI people are going to be providing evidence under Component 1.5 related to candidate and candidate use of technology, model and application. So what you can do here is when you tag it to Component 1.5, you can also tag it to your cross-cutting theme. So when it comes to writing the holistic summary, which we'll get to at the end of this webinar, about what's the evidence that you've integrated technology, you can pull from the evidence you've already embedded in Standard 1 related to Component 1.5 and talk specifically to candidates' use in model and application of technology. So let me pause again for a minute here and see if there are any feedback for me, any questions. On the Q&A board, I still only see the one question that had to do about getting the PowerPoints in advance. Let me pull over my attendee list. I don't see any hands up. Okay. So right now, folks, we're just going to plow ahead. We're going to go into Standard 2 and 3 next and see where technology is embedded in those standards and where you may be supplying evidence as part of your self-study related to the standards. So in Standard 2, Component 2.1, you'll remember that this is focused pretty strongly on partners and your deep partnerships. You'll see that it includes technology-based collaborations. So some of your partners may be at a distance, and you use video conferencing to collaborate with those partners. Perhaps you have virtual field experiences that you've arranged with partners so that students can see into existing classrooms, either through use of cyber windows or videotaping and analysis. This can be highlighted when you talk about your deep partnerships. You can include those technology-based collaborations that are a part of those partnerships. In Component 2.2, it talks primarily about clinical educators, and you'll see the 3 little dots at the beginning to say this is quite a lengthy component, and so I took out only the part at the end that talks about technology, which says that you can use multiple indicators and appropriate technology-based applications related to establishing, maintaining, and refining criteria for selection of clinical educators for their professional development, for performance evaluations, etc. So appropriate technology-based applications means that you can provide evidence that you use such things as videotaping and analysis. Perhaps your clinical educators tape some portion, or the candidates tape some portion of their teaching, and that there's an opportunity to respond to that by your clinical educators. that you use web-based evaluations for the evaluation of candidates, or reciprocally for the candidates' evaluation of their clinical supervisors, whether those are school-based or EPP-based. Use of email, use of databases, provision of webinars perhaps for professional development opportunities for your clinical educators. Perhaps many of your materials are available online and that those are used extensively, and that there are evaluation opportunities so that your clinical partners don't submit paper anymore, but they evaluate the cooperating teachers and the student teachers online. So these are all possible ways for you to demonstrate that you have included technology-based applications related to clinical educators as well. And the last component of Standard 2 is the clinical practice component. And as you can see here, it talks about clinical experiences that can include technology-enhanced learning opportunities. Okay, so what's meant by that? Again, we get back to this idea of virtual field experiences, cyber windows, videotaping and analysis, even the, providing your candidates with the preparation to use quicker response systems, interactive whiteboards, and then having those kinds of modeling of their use of those things in the clinical setting. So these are some things, too, that you can also highlight when you're providing your evidence for component 2.3. Whenever you have some piece of evidence that is technology related, that's embedded in the standards, and that you're uploading as evidence as part of 2.1, 2.2, or 2.3, remember that you have the opportunity to take that same piece of evidence and click on, well, this also applies to these other areas. So you click on it to say that it applies to technology, cross-cutting theme. Now, for those of you that are involved in the inquiry brief, you would provide your evidence of these pieces related to Standard 2 in your internal audit of your quality assurance system, where you're providing evidence to CAPE that you are monitoring these three components and what's your evidence. And so you can include anything related to technology in that, and then excerpt that also when you speak about the cross-cutting theme. So let's move on to Standard 3, which is the final standard in which the technology wording appears explicitly. So in component 3.4, which is related to selectivity throughout the preparation program, you'll see that the wording of this standard talks about multiple forms of evidence to indicate that your candidates are developing three things: content knowledge, pedagogical content knowledge, and pedagogical skills. And this particular component goes on to say, and the integration of technology in all of these domains, the domains being content knowledge, pedagogical content knowledge, and pedagogical skills. So most of your evidence for this, the development of the integration of technology in these domains, was probably already presented by you as part of component 1.5. And so you could cross-tag it again. Whatever you presented in 1.5, you can cross-tag to 3.4 and cross-tag to the cross-cutting theme. Okay, because you'll remember that when you provide evidence in each of these component buckets, like Standard 3, when it comes to talking, providing your holistic summary, the holistic summary addresses Standard 3. It doesn't address technology, okay? So think, I've put in, evidence of the integration of technology in component 1.5, and I've talked about how my candidates are meeting Standard 1, or how I have provided evidence that our candidates meet Standard 1, and you've provided evidence related to 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and you've talked holistically about how you meet the standard of clinical partnerships in practice. And in Standard 3 here in this component, you can talk about how you've met the Standard 3 of selectivity of high-quality candidates from recruitment all the way through to exit. So at no point in the CAPE standards or responding to the standards have you spoken specifically about the integration of technology across your EPP preparation program. So that's why when you come to the cross-cutting theme, your evidence may already have been provided within the components of the standards, but your conversation about that, your narrative about how you've integrated technology will draw upon that multiple placement of evidence and talk holistically about technology specifically. Okay, so let's go on here. What are the reviewers looking for here? Since cross-cutting theme, just like diversity, is not a standard, okay, what the visiting teams are going to be doing is not judging it as a standard. So they're not going to be citing stipulations or weaknesses for cross-cutting themes. However, because questions could arise, okay, under the cross-cutting theme that makes your reviewers say, gosh, you know, when I was reviewing Standard 1 or Standard 2 or Standard 3, I didn't really notice that that was a weakness. And so how you write up your narrative, the holistic summary, which we'll get to in a minute, could potentially raise questions related to how the components of the standards were addressed. So this is important to understand here, because although the visitors don't judge the cross-cutting themes as standards, there are ways in which the standards could raise concerns, or concerns about meeting the standards could be raised in terms of these themes of diversity and technology. And I hope that's clear. Seems a bit convoluted even as I think about it. Okay, let me look again at our attendees to see if any hands are raised. I don't see any. No questions in the chat, and no more questions in my Q&A. Boy, you're a silent crowd today. Maybe we've all got still recovering from Thanksgiving. Maybe none of this makes sense. Okay. Here we go. Analysis of the evidence that demonstrates technology integration. That is exactly the question that appears as part of the Selected Improvement or Transformation Initiative pathway. Is analyze your evidence that you've submitted already that demonstrates that technology is integrated throughout your programs. That's the question. So it's a holistic response. You're going to be, analyzing any data that you presented, interpretations, conclusions. Are you noticing any weaknesses or strengths in the data that you presented, the evidence that you presented? Now, I've put a website down here. This is from North Carolina State University. All of their materials are available on this website. They did put in their self-study for the CAPE accreditation as an early adopter of the CAPE standards. And CAPE is saying that North Carolina State University did a fine job. And so if you click on this particular link, or if you write it down real quick, or if you email me afterwards and I'll send it to you, you can see how they've gone about addressing the cross-cutting themes. And what you will see there is their holistic statement about how technology is integrated across their campus with links to the evidence that they submitted in support of the integration of technology. And so I know you all are asking for examples a lot, and here's an opportunity for you to go in and see what one university has done in responding to the cross-cutting theme of diversity, as well as everything else. You can see how they respond to diversity, how they respond to technology, how they've addressed standards, and so this may be helpful for you. It's all publicly available on their website. There we go. Let's go on to the next slide. I think we're pretty much done here, unless there are questions or comments. Yeah, that's my final feedback. We finished up quickly today, only 30 minutes in. Since there are no questions, those are our next steps. We'll send out a feedback survey, and there's only one more webinar that happens in December. It's on December 15th at 5 o'clock, and it talks about aligning and tagging evidence. Let me check my Q&A again. I do see there are some additional questions, and this is great. So let me get to answering those questions. We have integrated, let me read it to y'all. We have integrated the ISTE standards throughout the sequence of ed classes and are gathering data on how the students are mastering those standards. Does that address 1.5 and 3.4 in part? Yes, absolutely it does. Absolutely. So if you've got those ISTE standards embedded in there and you're gathering data on how students are mastering those standards, then you've absolutely handled 1.5 and the 3.4 in terms of the technology component, and you're well on your way to addressing the integration of technology throughout your preparation program. You're in good shape. Okay, let me go to my Q&A and see. It says I have 4 questions, but right now it's only showing. Yes, the recording of this presentation will be available. It'll be available on the CAPE website. If you have signed up for the CAPE updates, which comes out once a week, there's also a hot link to the webinars there on those CAPE updates. If you haven't, go to the CAPE website and log in, or you can email Zachary Everett, I guess, to get on the list to register and receive those updates. On the website, you can find it under Accreditation and Program Review, and then when you get the drop-down menu, click on Accreditation Resources, and they all have 3 of the webinars available, the 3 most recent webinars available, and that should be up by the end of this week. Good, I got another question. So the cross-cutting evidence needs to be noticeable and tagged across the standards mentioned here and in any other aspect that demonstrates student learning. Yes, you will be able to upload, if you have it, as part of the SI or TI approaches, you are able to upload evidence specific to the cross-cutting theme if there's something additional that you want to share. Let's say you have a description of the technology that's available to your students, like computer, smart classrooms, and you have an iPod program or an iPad program, and there's lots of other things that you want to be able to describe specific to technology, because it's not necessarily part of, standards 1, 2, or 3, but it's something the university provides as a whole or whatever. You can upload evidence related to the cross-cutting theme itself and use that in addition to whatever you've uploaded related to the standards. So the most important part is definitely related to student learning, candidate learning, as well as student learning. So you want to make sure that it's the modeling and application of those technology standards, whether they're your own proficiency or the ISTE standards. But that's CAPE's primary focus, is that technology is being used by candidates in a way that enhances the learning and hopefully the achievement of the students that they're instructing. Could I talk more about using technology evidence to support Standard 5? Yeah, that's an interesting point, because in the language of the commission, they were looking for how the EPP was using technology for analyzing and storing and gathering data. And so I think you have an opportunity in Standard 5 under Component 5.1 to talk about your quality assurance system as a whole. And in that part, you would want to speak to how you use technology as part of your quality assurance system. Now, for very big programs, you could be using some of the vendor platforms that are available for gathering information on clinical practice or student competencies and key assessments, et cetera. So you would mention that. You could also be using SurveyMonkey, let's say, to get at the candidate and employer surveys. You could be using spreadsheets for analysis. You could be using SPSS software. You could be using, a multitude of things and technology related to data collection, analysis, gathering, et cetera. And so definitely find some time or space to put in a good solid paragraph about the technology that you are using as part of your quality assurance system. Let me see other questions. I'm loving this. I'm so happy you're asking questions. Okay, and yes, I said the recording will be available. Okay, we've covered that. Good. It looks like a whole bunch of other questions came up in another section. Are you seeing a grayed out little doobie in the middle of your screen? That's because that's the Q&A piece that I'm looking at. Okay. Let me scroll down here. I see there are 8 more questions. Can I also spend a moment talking about social media? Is this simply using it for information or student teachers using it in the classroom? Now, that's a really good question. Let's go back to those proficiencies because what the reviewers are looking for. Let's see if we can get back to that slide. Because as I read that, one more. No, why did I find that? As I read that piece, they're really looking for the social networks right here. Oops. It's the ability to design and facilitate digital learning, mentoring, and collaboration, including the use of social networks. So I would think that you're right. We could be talking about 2 things here. We could be talking about using the information or student teachers using it in the classroom. I think they are talking about collaboration using social media in the classroom in a meaningful way. But again, that can be something that could be a part of the teaching students about when to access and how to assess the quality of digital content. Okay, so you've got a lot of social networks out there. You've got, well, different applications related to social networking like Facebook and LinkedIn and Pinterest and all of these other places that students can go. And so part of the use of that, I would think, is not only what's appropriate and how to use, but what's the quality of a variety of different social networks and how can it be used well for collaboration. So perhaps there's a classroom Facebook page, okay, that students can collaborate on assignments perhaps. That kind of thing is what comes to mind. Okay, let me see. I hope that helps. Okay, and I spoke to the technology in Standard 5. And I talked about the tagging across the standards, talked about using technology for Standard 5, talked about when that'll be available. Okay, I think I've addressed all the questions that appeared in Q&A, but I have a nice long one in the chat. So let me get to that. Can I provide some clarification on needing to meet 3 of the 4 potential sources of evidence? Do each of our certification areas meet 3 of the 4, or is that conceptualized more broadly for the entire education program? Well, here's what I can say about that. Standard 1 requires you to disaggregate any data by all the preparation programs that you offer, all the licensure programs that you offer. Since this particular slide, what are the reviewers looking for, is embedded in component 1.5, I would say that each of your preparation programs in some way need to be addressing at least 3 of these 4 areas. This is what reviewers are being trained to look for. So although you can think of it broadly across the entire teacher preparation program, which is how you will talk about it when it comes to the cross-cutting theme, when you're presenting your evidence for component 1.5, you're going to need to be disaggregating that data for all of your licensure areas. I hope that answers the question. Thank you very much. And if it doesn't, give me a follow-up question. That was in the chat. Okay, and folks said, hi, how can I get a copy of the PowerPoint? You can just email me. I've got 2 email addresses, and you're welcome to either one of them. One was LCV Inc. INC number 1, LCVinc1@gmail.com or deb.eldridge@gmail.com. Okay, folks, I don't see any additional questions. I'm going to hang out here for a while. That's the end of this presentation. Let me get back to the final slide there. And just say I'm going to hang out here in case any more questions come up. I do want to keep this particular slide up because it's got the web address, the URL, in case you want to check on how another university has already addressed this cross-cutting theme of technology. And you could dig in and see, in addition, how what's the evidence they brought to component 1.5, because they do have a list of their evidence sources. And so that might be something to dig into and look around and see what you can find there as well. That's it for now. Okay, so let me check on our participants, attendees, see if I have any hands up. I do, yay, got a hand up. Oh, I'm so excited. I can see your hand, Deb. Go ahead and speak up. I'm going to be quiet, and I see that you're unmuted, so you should be able to ask your question. Go ahead. Okay, Deb, can you speak up there? I'm not hearing you. Oops. Okay, still can't hear you, Deb. All right, see, this happened to us last time when somebody wanted to talk and they had their hand up, and you know what? We couldn't be heard. I'm not sure what's happening here. All right. Any other questions? Let's see. I do have some questions now appearing. Phone not working properly. Ooh, I'm so sorry. So yes, somebody in fact did try to ask a question, but the phone's not working. Is there any way you can type it out on the Q&A or in the chat room? Let's see. Let me update my questions here. I'm seeing some more up here. Here we go. Could spend a minute. No, I did that. Talking about social media. Here comes one. Technology. What can the commission report be found again? The commission report should be on the CAPE website. Look in the Knowledge Center under Resources. That's where it should appear. If you can't find it, feel free to give me an email, okay, and ask for a copy of the commission report because I have it handy and I can easily shoot it to you. Let me see if I can get into the CAPE website and muck around a little bit while we're talking here. And perhaps we can find it together. Here we go. I'm saying perhaps in the Knowledge Center we can find the CAPE. Here, haha. See, I think I pretty much got it. I'm going to close down my participants, my chat room and stuff, so you're not seeing my screen grayed out here. Okay. Move the recording to the top. Okay. Here we go. Let's go into page 2. All documents, building, CAPE Commission Report. There you go. Okay, so you can find it under the resources there. Okay? Good. All right, any other questions, comments from anybody? If not, what I'm going to do is end our session today. Let's see what we have also, since we're here. What have we got as part of CAPE accreditation resources? Yeah, I think right here, under evidence, you can find the CAPE Commission report as well. So click on those, and again, feel free to email me if you can't find what you need. All righty. Everybody's going bye-bye. I can hear all the clicks. Let me get back to my Q&A and see if anybody asked another question. And nope, no more new questions according to my list. So thank you, everybody. I appreciate you being here. I'm going to stop our recording, and I look forward to seeing you again.